Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona, and that was the closing bell as Wall Street rallies on new but questionable hopes that the war with Iran could end soon. The Dow closing up over 1,000 points after Iran's president told the EU Council president that Tehran has the will to end the war if specific guarantees are met. This is not the first time we've heard these kinds of comments from Tehran during the conflict. And today's market rally coming despite the continued chokehold on ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz, leading to a surge in oil prices, with crude oil settling at over $100 a barrel for the second straight day. And the national average for a gallon of gas now surpassing $4 for the first time since 2022. The White House, though, trying to downplay the rise in gas prices, saying in a statement, quote, when Operation Epic Fury is complete, gas prices will plummet back down to the multi-year lows American drivers enjoyed before the short-term disruptions. Meanwhile, this morning, President Trump lashed out at allies facing fuel shortages, saying in a social media post they should, quote, build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait and just take it, and, quote, go get your own oil. At a Pentagon press conference this morning, Defense Secretary Hegseth similarly urging U.S. allies to get more involved in the Strait of Hormuz.
There are countries around the world who ought to be prepared to step up on this critical waterway as well. It's not just the United States Navy. Last time I checked, there was supposed to be a big, bad Royal Navy that could be prepared to do things like that as well. So he's pointing out this is an international waterway that we use less than most, in fact, dramatically less than most. So the world ought to pay attention to be prepared to stand up.
It comes after a Kuwait-flagged oil tanker was damaged in a drone strike today while anchored at a port in Dubai. Kuwait's state-owned energy company is blaming Iran for the attack. According to the Wall Street Journal, President Trump is now telling aides he's willing to end the U.S. military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. President Trump also telling my colleague Peter Nicholas in a phone call this morning that when it comes to war, quote, we're doing great and it's coming to an end. Joining me now is NBC's Kelly O'Donnell outside the White House, NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, and NBC's Stephanie Gosk in Tel Aviv. Thank you all so much for joining me. I do want to start over at the White House with Kelly. Kelly, President Trump today is saying U.S. allies should go get their own oil. But just yesterday, he posted, quote, if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants. Kelly, can you explain this shift in tone from the president?
Well, we've been in a pinball effect with the president's comments about the military action that he launched against Iran, about his relationship with the allied countries that are typically great partners to the United States. We have seen him give different directions, and this is another example of that, where he talks about a time frame for the war, talking about then ending it. We know that there is evidence of forward movement of U.S. military personnel and lots of equipment to the region. At the same time, he's talking about winding it down. The president often uses a bit of a chaos theory to try to keep adversaries out of balance, and that may be part of it as well as the evolving situation where the president is trying to keep markets from having the kind of downturn we've seen. Today's an example of the rise in the market. So the president is doing a lot of different things. It can be challenging to try to find the one through line in his plan. He has talked about objectives that are laid out that he wants to achieve and that they are making progress. At the same time, a specific timetable is often dependent on activities on the ground. Today, you also told our colleague Peter Nicholas in that call that you mentioned, Mel, that the president said that he believes they're dealing now with someone in Iranian leadership that is less radicalized than those that existed before. We don't know what basis he is making such an assertion, because those that are in the leadership and have been a part of the apparatus of Iran's government are all typically of a like mind. There may be varying degrees, but why he would say not radicalized and more reasonable is unclear to us at this point. The president's trying to manage the markets, manage the campaign, manage the allies, and trying to get them to say, hey, if you need oil, it's on you. So that's a different tone from the president, who was the one who chose to engage in this war with Iran. Melanie?
A very different tone. One thing that the White House has been consistent on, though, is downplaying concern about gas prices. But, Kelly, what are your sources telling you, and just how concerned is the White House about the national average now hitting $4 a gallon?
So I'm having a little malfunction with my earpiece, but I think you were referencing gas prices. So gas prices, significant there. Obviously, many Americans are dealing with how they determine their costs. And those who have long commutes or make their living behind the wheel, whether it's trucking or cars running, all the different ways in which that affects just about every part of American working life. And then as consumers, we're at the mercy of all of those different businesses that rely on gasoline. We're seeing it spike at a point we've not seen in a handful of years. And that's something that we are watching very carefully because that is a key indicator. And the president has argued that you could get the gas prices to come down quickly. That is unclear, actually, because even if this conflict ends, even if the Strait of Hormuz were to be in a more stable place, there's lots of supply chain issues that have to do with energy, and it could be longer. So the president is very concerned about how the American voters in a midterm year are concerned about that, and the broader economy and what those markets are doing. Melanie?
And Kelly, before I let you go, and if your earpiece is hopefully working,
yes.
Okay, great, because we've got some breaking news about legal developments on the construction of the White House ballroom. What can you tell us about this? And isn't it too late since the East Wing is already torn down?
Well, for our viewers, they probably know there may be no more project that appears to occupy as much of the president's passion and focus as the ballroom. A court today, a federal court, ruled that it must stop. The construction must stop. Now, we've been watching. There's a big crane above our heads here that's on the other side of the White House where the East Wing used to be. Don't see evidence yet of a work stoppage, but we'll be watching closely for that. The court says that the president is a steward, not the owner of the White House, and that changes of this import needed to go through Congress. That did not happen. And so the National Trust, which is a group that protects the historical preservation of all kinds of things in Washington that are of great national importance, sued, and a federal judge has said that this project must stop immediately for a temporary injunction, and Congress must act. So you're right. The East Wing is gone. That demolition happened. There is a hole in the ground and big plans, according to the president. What could happen is going forward having new channels of oversight, which is what many people who have been concerned about this project have argued from the beginning, that there has not been oversight. A federal court is now saying Congress has to play a role. Melanie?
An important storyline, Kelly. Thank you so much. I want to turn now to our business correspondent, Brian. We saw the market surge on the news of Iran's president laying out Iran's terms for ending the war. Can you explain this level of volatility that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, let's acknowledge that it was a great day on Wall Street. We saw massive moves in the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ composite, basically everywhere you were looking. For the most part, you were seeing green on your screen, up about 3% on those major indexes. And I should also point out that our team is confirming that this has been the best day since May of last year for the S&P and the NASDAQ. And all of this is because of optimism that undid some of the concerns that we've seen over the last few days over where this war in Iran was going to go. Now, whether or not that's a rational bet is another question. But I should point out that when you see massive swings on the stock market like this, you do have to remember that there's a lot of options betting that's going on in the market. Without getting into the nitty gritty, there's a lot of puts and calls where people are essentially accelerating their bets, where market downturns can accelerate and market upturns can accelerate. So the volatility in the market is still in place despite the fact that we now have a green day. And I should point out, if you zoom out over the 1 month period, the S&P 500, despite those gains today, still down 5%, Melanie.
Interesting. I do want to dig into the Strait potentially remaining closed. The president has said the U.S. doesn't need that oil, but what would be the long-term impacts of the Strait of Hormuz remaining disrupted?
Yeah, and this is where there's a real challenge between the rhetoric that we're hearing from the White House and a potential exit strategy, and then what happens with the Strait of Hormuz. Because it sounds like, based off of some of the commentary we've been hearing from the president as of late, there could be a scenario where the United States exits the war, but the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. That would be a big deal for all of those ships that travel through that very narrow 21-mile wide passageway through which 20% of the world's oil goes through. So even if there were to be a resolution on the U.S. side of this involvement in this war, if ships are stuck there, you don't really see necessarily a light at the end of the tunnel for barrels of oil prices going down, where we see Brent and WTI crude oil. Those are the major benchmarks, still well above $100 per barrel. That is still up about $30, $40 from where we were prior to this war, which means we could still face elevated oil prices. But again, we'll have to see.
Well, speaking of oil prices, the average gas price just hit $4 a gallon. The White House says gas prices will plummet back to the lows after this war is over. But is that what's actually going to happen, Brian?
Well, that could happen if there are ships that make their passageway again through the Strait of Hormuz. We were just showing that chart before that shows you how many ships have actually gone through that channel. Prior to this war, there were about 100, 110 ships going through the Strait of Hormuz a day. Currently, we're seeing sub 10. So until we start to see 10 times essentially the traffic that we're seeing right now, well, it's just not going to get back to those levels. And I should also point out that major energy facilities like LNG producing facilities in Qatar have been so badly damaged that in some cases the Qataris are saying it could take us as long as 5 years to get that back. So yes, even though the White House, Caroline Leavitt, saying that prices should drop, it's going to be difficult, according to oil analysts that I've spoken to see those prices get back to where they were prior to this war.
No doubt, Brian. Thank you so much for breaking that all down. I want to bring it here on set. Courtney Kube is with me. There was a press briefing this morning from Secretary Hegseth. Did we learn anything new about the plans for the war?
Not really. I mean, Secretary Hegseth likes to hide behind the idea of operational security, and there's some truth to that, right? Talking about what the U.S. military is going to do in the coming days and weeks, where they're going to go, the numbers and all of that, yeah, that does pose a potential direct threat to the members of the military who are forward. But we still don't have a good sense of what's happened behind us in this war. And that's one of the big questions is, exactly what has Iran been able to strike and damage? What has the U.S. been able to hit? We know very broad terms, but we really don't have the specifics. We don't have the level of detail that we have had about past conflicts, even recent ones.
And one of the other big questions is what the objectives are in this war. Trump said one of the main ones is to rid Iran of its nuclear capabilities. He told CBS that he could leave the region without removing the country's enriched uranium, saying that's so deeply buried, it's going to be very hard for anybody. It's pretty safe, but, we'll make a determination, one of his favorite phrases. But what do we know about Iran's enriched uranium and what it would take to actually extract it?
It would be a huge undertaking. So if, in fact, it is all at one site, which it may not be, it may be split between two of these sites. They are sites that have both been bombed by the U.S. last June, Operation Midnight Hammer. It's not clear whether the canisters themselves may have been damaged in those bombings. They may just very well be entombed underground. But if they were damaged, if in fact someone were to go in and dig out those facilities, which would be a big undertaking in and of itself, then you may be met with hazardous gases, because that's the form of the highly enriched uranium. It's a gas. When they go into these locations, then you have to figure out a way to get them out and to potentially transform. It's a huge undertaking. It's days or weeks not to do, not hours. And again, at this point, it's still not 100% clear where the entire stockpile is, if it's at Isfahan or it might be split at another location as well.
Such important context. Today, Secretary Hegseth said that Iran's military capabilities are actually decreasing. Let's play some of that sound and talk about it on the other side.
American firepower is only increasing. Iran's decreasing. We have more and more options, and they have less. Of note, the last 24 hours saw the lowest number of enemy missiles and drones fired by Iran.
Now, Hegseth said this as a Kuwaiti oil tanker was just hit. So is it actually accurate to say that Iran's firepower is decreasing?
It is, in that the U.S. continues, and the Israelis a little bit, but it's right now, when you're talking about actual missiles and drones, the U.S. is taking the lion's share of the strikes against those. And they are hitting them, and they are continuing to strike. Their storage facilities, the majority of the missile launchers have been damaged or destroyed. Not all of them, but the majority. But what's really key here, Melanie, is that despite that fact, and despite the fact that the U.S. has been unleashing hundreds of strikes every single day, Iran is still carrying out a relatively steady stream of attacks every single day. So it's a combination of drones and missiles, but the drones are everywhere from 70 maybe per day. The missiles are anywhere between about 30 and 50 per day. And what's really striking here is these missiles and these drones are more accurate. They are targeting them more specifically. That's how we end up with things like the attack on Prince Sultan Air Base last Friday that led to a couple of aircraft damaged and several American service members seriously injured.
Courtney, thank you so much for all of that reporting. I want to turn now to what's happening in the Middle East, where Stephanie Gosk is there for us. The Iranian president did discuss the possibility of the war ending, and he repeated Iran's need for certain guarantees. What more do we know?
Yeah, this report comes from Iranian state TV that Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, got on the phone today with the president of the EU Council, and he said that they do want these guarantees for peace, chief among them the guarantee that the country won't be attacked again. But we've also heard officials from Iran talk about how they want reparations for the damage that has been done to their country, and that they also want official acknowledgement that they control the Strait of Hormuz. So that can kind of show you they're likely not going to get all of those things. But, you know, he is speaking to these ongoing negotiations, Melanie, and we really don't know what's going on behind closed doors and what the discussions are about. But comments like this can certainly give some people, definitely the markets, it seems today, some confidence that maybe this is going in the right direction.
And you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, which remains largely closed. President Trump did say that allies should learn how to fight for themselves and go take their own oil. This also comes as European leaders have pushed back on getting involved in the war. So take us through what got us to this point that we're in now, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that we've been having really for a while now, and European leaders, in no uncertain terms, the first time President Trump said they should get involved, said they want no part of it. The president, in his post in Truth Social today, did not acknowledge the fact that the U.S. and Israel were the ones who offensively went after Iran, and it led to this situation. But still called on the European countries to get involved. In fact, called out, name-checked the UK and said if there are concerns about the soaring prices of jet fuel, perhaps they should get their fuel from the U.S., but beyond that, they should take an active role. There was a response today from the French president, Emmanuel Macron. He said that the tweet was a surprise, but that France's position has remained the same since day one. In other words, they are not going to get involved, Melanie.
And as we mentioned, Iran has continued its attack on Gulf neighbors. We're hearing new warnings from them about targeting civilian infrastructure. What are we hearing about that?
Yeah, well, there has been infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, being targeted for a while now in the Gulf. A lot of the energy infrastructure in the Gulf, you heard Brian mention it a moment ago, in Qatar, but also in Bahrain. There are oil refineries, export facilities. All of these places have been targeted. Of recent concern are desalination plants. And there was a desalination plant in Kuwait that was struck. And this is something that might be new to people in the U.S. hearing about it. But in that part of the world, desalination plants are what give people water. I mean, it is that vital. And to hit a plant like that really could starve the region. Ralph Sanchez is actually in the Gulf, and he had a chance to go to a press conference today and ask about this specific question. Listen to this.
Both the United States and Iran have threatened to hit desalination plants. What would the consequences be here in the Gulf if desalination plants become a target?
Since this escalation began, we have warned against targeting vital civilian infrastructure. We have said it very clearly that this is a threat to all of us in the region. This region depends heavily on desalination. We have very little other resources of drinking water or natural water altogether, and therefore we see this as a very big threat to people's lives here in the region, and we condemn all attacks on civilian infrastructure as completely unnecessary and very dangerous for the whole region.
So they're dealing with threats to their people, they're dealing with threats to their economy. These are significant challenges, and they aren't going to go away soon, Melanie.
Stephanie, thank you, and also to our colleague Raf for all your incredible reporting overseas. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is the former commander of U.S. Central Command and a distinguished military fellow at the Middle East Institute, retired four-star General Joseph Votel. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. President Trump told my colleague that the war with Iran is, quote, coming to an end. So is it that simple? And doesn't Iran also get a say in when this war ends?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you, Melanie. Yeah, certainly they do. I mean, this is open conflict. It's a war, so Iran has a voice in this, and certainly is taking actions here to respond to the operations that have been conducted. So, yeah, they definitely have the role, and of course, it's the United States, the president's responsibility to make a determination about how well we've done accomplishing the objectives that he's laid out for us.
There's also been a lot of discussion about what action the U.S. could take when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and Kube Island. What do you think, though, is the most realistic option, and would that require boots on the ground?
Well, the most realistic option for trying to open this is that we have to dedicate the maritime resources, the air resources, to actually opening this strait back up and restoring freedom of navigation and free flow of commerce through this very important waterway. And you know, that was an expected action that Iran would take in the event that they were attacked, and now we have to deal with that, and that's a significant responsibility, I think, for us at this particular point, is to get this going, not just for Iran, but certainly for our other partners in the region.
In an interview with the New York Post this morning, President Trump said the Strait of Hormuz will, quote, automatically open once the U.S. leaves the region. Is it that simple?
I don't know. Of course, that will be up to Iran. Iran has kind of the operational advantage, at least by geography, over the Straits of Hormuz, so they can certainly make things very, very difficult there. Whether we depart and they open it up or not remains to be seen. I would just point out that just in the last couple of days, they've tried to turn this into a toll system here, where ships will have to pay through. That doesn't support the free flow of commerce, and so whether that's acceptable or not will have to be a determination made by our policymakers.
And perhaps that's why now the Wall Street Journal reporting that President Trump said he's willing to end the war without opening the Strait of Hormuz. But he also has threatened to strike Iran's civilian energy infrastructure, including desalination plants. If Iran doesn't agree to end the war, do you believe that would be a lawful target?
Well, I think it would be a mistake to do this. Striking those types of targets, desalination plants in particular, would likely invite reciprocal attacks from Iran that would do, incalculable damage across the region, and it would open us up to allegations of violating international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions, and that's just not how we operate, and it's not where we want to be. I recognize the president has a very unique way of communicating, but in selecting military targets, we have an obligation to operate in accordance with the law.
Well, clearly, President Trump is getting frustrated. In his social media post this morning, he told countries that rely on the Strait of Hormuz, which include many of our allies, obviously, that you'll have to start learning how to fight for yourselves. The USA won't be there to help you anymore. Just like you weren't there for us, go get your own oil. So is that an option? And are European countries even in a position to go in and get their own oil?
I don't think they are. I mean, they would likely try to use some kind of diplomatic or other process to try to get their ships in and out of the Gulf. If that was the case, the best way of creating coalitions to go in and do these types of operations with our international partners is to start early. And unfortunately, that was not the case in this situation. So we find ourselves after the fact trying to create international support for this. And as we've seen, it's been very, very difficult to harness.
Before you go, I also want to ask you about Spain closing off its airspace to U.S. planes involved in the war. Just how significant of a rift is this war creating between the U.S. and our allies?
Well, it's very clear that a number of European countries, and a number of them who are NATO allies, have very strong views on the necessity for this war, and are expressing it by things like we've seen in Spain or recently today in Italy. Certainly, these make things more difficult. There are workarounds. Certainly, the military can find ways to work around this. It's inconvenient. It's not insurmountable. But certainly, we'd like to operate in an environment where we had the full support of our coalition or of our international partners, and really operating within a coalition. I think it just reminds us why it's important to do the work up front that we need to do before we conduct military operations.
No doubt. General, thank you so much, as always, for your expertise.
Good to be with you.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.